Hello and welcome to the latest episode of Story of a Storyteller. And my guest today is Eve McDonnell. How are you, Eve?
I'm not too bad, Conor. How are you? Thanks for having me.
Not at all. It's a joy. I'm actually really happy because usually when I have a guest on, I usually make a mistake with their name somewhere. And it's just, your name is just so easy. I'm just like, oh, I'm not going to get this one wrong.
Yay! Glad to be of service.
Eve, for anyone watching and listening, is the author of Elsetime, a children's novel, which we will be talking a lot about. And it's there behind her as well. It's a beautiful cover, and it's one of the most striking things about it. It's such a different cover, so we can't wait to talk
Thank
about
you.
that.
That's by Holly Ovenden. She's a fabulous illustrator and artist. So I was blessed to have Holly do the cover for my book. Absolutely blessed.
Very, very talented. For anyone listening, it's hard to explain. There's the crow looking into a puddle on the top half of the book. Then it says the name of the book, Elsetime, and then there's the reflection of the crow looking back up, and it's just it's very stylistic. And just check, there's a link in the show notes and description if you want to take a look at the book in closer detail and even buy it possibly. But anyway, Eve, before we start plugging books, we should talk first, I think. So to start us off, can you tell me a bit about your childhood and where you grew up?
Yeah, I can. Well, firstly, I'm Irish, obviously. I was actually born in Cavan. And I didn't spend long in Cavan actually. I think my mum and dad got me out and moved me to Dublin. I think by the time I was about 2 or 3. So my entire childhood was Dublin. So we lived in Dunleary and moved, I think, to Cabinteely then when I was about 8, a little bit further south. And as it happens, that's kind of the direction I kept going in because as soon as school was done and I could afford it, and college was done, I moved further south again down to Wicklow and spent a few years there and kept moving south. And I'm now in Wexford. So I'm hoping maybe I'll end up south of France or Spain or something like that. So yeah, my childhood was definitely a Dublin upbringing. Went to the local community school, didn't fare too well there. It was a huge school and ended up moving to an all-girls Catholic school in the city centre instead. I'm sure that did me some good favour at some level. So yeah, good childhood.
Very, very good. I know because I was listening to a different podcast you did before that one of your favorite books is coincidentally also one of my favorite books, The Wizard of Oz.
Yeah.
As a child, so like, why that book? What is it about The Wizard of Oz that speaks to you?
Gosh, and it still does speak to me. It's to me, well, firstly, I'm a writer and an artist. So
Yes.
the actual illustrations in the book just blew me away. And it was that the wonderful old style way of not only having illustrations on individual pages, but there were book plates, as they were called, picture plates in between, so you'd read the first 3 chapters and then there'd be, say, 5 or 6 full page illustrations, some of which detailing the story you've just read and others giving you a taste of what was to come. So it was very exciting and kept you going throughout the book. So there were 2 or 3 sort of sections where you had just these beautiful glossy illustrations. So that in itself was what attracted me to the book. But I suppose I can't remember whether or not I'd seen the movie before or after I read the book itself. But when you think back, the book was written in 1900. Like
Yeah.
it's donkeys years ago. And the guy who wrote it, L. Frank Baum, he wrote it, as he said, with the intention to bring pleasure to children, not to teach them a lesson or to have some sort of a message in the background. In fact, there is a beautiful message in the book, but that was not his intention. And I just felt, it did stand out for that very reason alone, that it was just magical. And it sort of showed you that the imagination has no bounds. It literally goes from one crazy scenario to the next. And better than that, like when you compare it to the movie, and I love the movie, it's my favorite movie too, but when you read the book, there are so many extra little bits in it,
Yeah.
and especially for younger readers, it was like, to me, it was like, I've used this before, but it's like going into your favorite sweet shop, seeing all your favorite sweets, and then discovering a secret room in the back where you can go in and there's more sweets, that you've never even dreamt of. So, reading the book brought that to me. And every time I read it, I forget that, oh my God, there was this whole little adventure and that whole little adventure. So I just, I held it really close to my heart because, that magic that you feel as a child reading a book like that is precious. Very few movies or books can do that, I think, to you. And when I write, because I write for children, I try to, in some way, get you in that world where it's just, you're just lost in it and it's magical. And yet you can see yourself in it. So that's kind of where I'm trying to. That's my aim, is to write something as magical as The Wonderful Wizard of Oz. I have my work cut out for me.
Indeed. Because yeah, like even just to stay on Wizard of Oz for just a sec, the film is very linear. It's very go to the Emerald City, go defeat the witch, come back, and I'll send you home. Whereas the book, I mean, they go all over the place. Is it the Winkies? There was
The Winkies, that's right. Yeah, there's a whole load of different things actually in the book, that really, like, they just blow you away. It really, it is quite different to the film. And to be honest, if you were to write that book as it's written today, and try and approach, say, an agent or a publisher, it probably wouldn't get accepted in the way in which it's written. But it's still, it just works, whatever it is about the magic of it. And I suppose it was very unique in its time, and it stood the test of time because that book is still being published today.
Yeah.
So it's just incredible to think that that was in 1900. It's so long ago, and yet every bit of it is still relevant. That the language is even relevant today. There's very little in it that you could sort of say, okay, that you have to cut that bit out or change that or whatever. I know the book has gone under, a few little snips here and there, to bring it up to date, but very little, so it's a magical read.
Yeah, because I think that's one thing, as a teacher, I find very hard sometimes to get kids into reading classics, because sometimes the language is so dense and is so different from their vernacular that children are just very hesitant. But there is certain books, and The Wizard of Oz is definitely one of them, that the language is just so open and easy and accessible,
Yes.
and it just makes the magic of the story come to life a lot easier, doesn't it?
It does, yeah. It's brilliant, a gorgeous book.
And before we started recording, you were telling me about another book you loved when you were a kid.
Well, this is it. When I know I'm a writer, and I should be saying I read book after book after book
Yeah.
after book. I was obsessed with, well, I'll call it nonfiction, but I was obsessed with reading encyclopedia, and not only that, the dictionary.
Yeah.
And I'm showing my age here now, but there used to be a guy that would call around and knock on doors selling these tomes, I suppose, these massive big encyclopedia that my parents must have spent like months of salaries of wages on these books alone. But they didn't come as new to our door. They were also second hand, and some of them are donkeys years old even by the time we got them. And I was fascinated by them because they were our Google. That's how we found out about the world. And as you said earlier, if you had a school project, the answer would be in that book, be it about weather, like dinosaurs, whatever it might be. And I still have those books. They were absolutely beautiful. Some of them even had little cutout diagrams that you kind of flip over and lift the lid and see what's inside, the human body or whatever it might be. So I was fascinated by them, but I was also fascinated by simply reading the dictionary. I suppose it kind of fed into what I ended up doing with my life,
Yeah.
writing. I just thought words were brilliant. And, there was a section before you got to the letter A, which, would give you kind of a multiple choice. What does this word mean? And the words to this day, I'd still struggle to understand some of them. And I used to test myself regularly on these words, and to me, I mean, what more could you ask for? But genuinely, I was definitely more non-fiction than fiction, growing up as a child. The fiction that I fell in love with ultimately, obviously I read The Wizard of Oz 100 million times, but I loved Tintin, Asterix, all that sort of stuff, graphic novels as we call them now, rather than your straightforward little
Novels.
Enid Blyton story. Yeah, that was what appealed to me at the time.
Yeah. That's one thing I'm learning a lot from doing this podcast is everyone really has a very unique relationship with reading and writing and stories and stuff like that. I mean, even though encyclopedia are nonfiction, there's still stories in there. It's just they're written in a
Absolutely. In
factual.
history. I love history. And I remember going to the library as a very young child, and all the other kids would be over in the fiction section for kids, and I would be over in the adult section for nonfiction, looking up space travel and managing pets and whatever it might be. And I just thought it was just, as I said, it was my Google. You had the answer to absolutely everything there. And I would take out as many books as I possibly could in one go and just study them. And, all these things, they ignite your imagination. And I suppose that's where it all started, if I really think back on it.
Yeah. Now, for anyone outside of Ireland, we're going to talk about something that they mightn't be necessarily aware of. For anyone who grew up in Ireland, they're going to be like, what? Really? People do win that? Because when you were younger, you won the Texaco art competition, which, I'll be honest with you, I didn't think actual children won that. I thought it was,
Oh, there you
I
go.
remember as a kid, I thought it was a scam. I thought we just all did a little bit of art, sent it in, and then, like, I'm going to say real artists, because that's the way I thought it was.
Did the drawings.
Adults did the one that was show, because the winners used to be on calendars and stuff like that.
That's right. It was huge, and it's still going.
Yeah.
It's still a very, very popular competition.
Yeah.
I didn't come first now. Hands up. I came third.
That's still good.
Still winning. So yeah, it was a big deal. I think I was 11 maybe at the time.
Oh,
So I'm
wow.
guessing, what would that be, 5th class, 6th class?
Yeah.
I was quite young in school, so probably 6th class for me. But yeah, it was a big change, big crossroads for me to win that competition. And obviously I had an interest in art before that, because when I was in 1st class, Mrs. Kern, our fabulous teacher, she was known as an artist. She was brilliant, and she encouraged us all to do art. It felt like every other day. And I remember she entered, without telling us, she entered some of our work to the Texaco art competition, and I won a certificate.
Oh, wow.
Back then, and that is probably when my interest in art, or I became labeled the artist.
Yeah.
And I remember at the end of that school year, so I would have been, what, 6, I suppose, or 7. They used to give out medals to best kids in class and all that sort of stuff. And my religion copybook came first in the class because of its drawings. There's the top half page, we have a little drawing.
Yeah.
So and I remember the effort I put into that, and I remember wrapping the book in tin foil and etching little drawings onto the cover of the tin foil. I still have it under my bed. But yeah, so that I think is when it was all triggered, in that I would try and gorge out a career in art, not writing, but art, back then.
Yeah, because then when you if we speed on from the Texaco art competition, you end up going to NCAD, which, for anyone outside Ireland, that's the National College of Art and Design, which, now I never tried to get in there, but I hear it isn't easy to get in, or at one stage it wasn't easy. Like, you had to have a huge portfolio prepared and everything.
Correct. Yeah,
So,
I was actually quite lucky in my secondary school, where I did my leaving cert. There were very few students interested in art. Unfortunately, it was the DOS subject back then. So my teacher, my art teacher, was really supportive of me, because she knew I had a genuine interest, and she let me prepare my portfolio in the classroom during lunch breaks and after school, using the materials that they had there, in terms of frames and all that sort of stuff, mount boards and what have you. So it was a big deal. I didn't probably appreciate it enough at the time, the support that I got. But I did get into art college, and I suppose, I was always sort of pushed, if you like, guided, whatever way you want to say it, into that direction. So going to NCAD was what I should be doing, and it's what I did do. But I have to admit, for years afterwards, I continued with my art. I went straight from NCAD into a graphic design job, which I stuck with for, I think it was 8 years. And my God, that was my college. That was where I learned everything that I needed to know about design. And but somewhere along the way, I kind of felt that I strongly believe we have this absolute need to create at some level, and some people feel that stronger than others. If I don't create in any shape or form, now I'm talking, it could be knitting, not that I do, but it could be anything, but to create, it's something that, it's a need that's in me, and if I don't do it, I will suffer the consequences. And it took me a long time to realize the difference in my well-being, literally how I felt about the world, and how much creativity I had done recently. So I felt that, although I was doing my art, if you like, in my college years, in my first job that time, I still felt something was missing. And I actually decided, and it was a big decision, but I did it, and that was to quit working in the area of design and art altogether and keep that as my hobby. So that was a big step I made, probably in my mid to late 20s.
Yeah.
Um, that I've no regrets. I am glad I did it, because I could feel myself sort of burning out in terms of my creative juices were just not flowing at that point, and I needed to do something completely different. So I did. I went to IT. I didn't even know what IT stood for, but I applied for a job in the newspaper, and ended up doing project management in IT and office management for a long, long time after that. No
Okay.
art at all.
And so then did the art become your passion then instead of your career, like you
It
did
did.
a
Yeah, I got back
hobby?
into my painting, which was brilliant. Because I'd come in all those years I was working in graphic design, I would come home exhausted, and
Mhm.
I couldn't put a paintbrush to a canvas. And I was blessed that that came back, and I really started to enjoy my art again. And to this day, I just love the feeling of being able to do that, and to do it for myself rather than as a job, you
Yeah,
know.
because that's what I was going to ask. That because I can picture when I was in secondary school, there was a friend of mine who was phenomenal at art, and no more like you, even in primary school, she was the artist.
Yeah.
That's just the label she was given, and literally every single one of us like being her group of friends, her teachers, her parents were like pushing her and pushing her to go for art, and I remember then she didn't for college, and a lot of people saw it as a waste, which is such a horrible thing to say about someone choosing a college course, that it's a waste.
Yeah.
Um, and she did say to me, "I was like, but I want to do it for me, and
Yeah.
if I do that, and you're basically the path I've taken for her, is that if you don't like if you do it for people, it's not your art."
Correct. Yeah,
You
it's
know?
a job. And I that's why I take on so few commissions now. I have to kind of pace myself, and make sure that some of the creativity is for me, and
Yeah,
some of it is for my job. Now, when I say creativity, I have to say there is so little difference between me painting and me writing.
that's what I was
It
going to ask. Yeah,
yeah, I am here to talk about writing after all, but I discovered quite late in life that there's, if you're looking at a blank canvas, the feelings, the emotions you go through when you are looking at that and about to start are identical to looking at a blank screen.
Mm,
And the feelings that you get when you create a painting are just the same as when you create a piece of writing, be it a whole book or a bit of flash fiction or whatever. It's the very same thing. The only difference is a painting doesn't take forever, although I am a very slow painter. It doesn't take forever. So you can actually see the light at the end of the tunnel from
yeah.
the get-go. With a book, it's a completely different kettle of fish. So you
Oh, it's a
do
marathon.
actually have to you have to put in other ways to carry you through, and other ways that keep you motivated until you get to the end. But so the transition from being an artist to being a writer was seamless for me, utterly seamless. I literally one day put down my paintbrush and picked up a pen. It was as simple as that. And a lot of people said, no, 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 you need to get back to your painting, get back to your painting, because nothing was happening with my writing for a long time. But I just, what writing did that painting didn't do for me was it satisfied me at a completely different level. It gave me everything that painting ever gave me, plus more. So I reckon quite strongly that this is what I was meant to be doing. And I didn't realize it until I was in my 40s and I met with a fortune teller.
Yes, and that
Um,
was my next question. Yeah. I love it. Keep going, keep going.
yeah, I had been through a lot. I'd gone through different careers. I'd job hopped, from my graphic design into IT, into HR, blah, blah, blah. I was made redundant from a fabulous job in HR. Um, and I said, this is it now. I'm going to spend the year focusing on my art and get really back. I was going to get my work into a gallery. That was my aim, blah, blah, blah. And was doing extra courses with the redundancy money, and also decided I'd try and get pregnant. And a few months later, twins. And yeah, so what really shocked me was a little bit prior to that, I'd been to this fortune teller, probably because redundancy was coming up and I kind of wanted to know what direction should I take. I had some opportunities coming, and she actually talked about twins, and I thought, you're off your rocker. This is not going, you're gone down the wrong road there, dearie, but
Yeah.
she was blooming well right. And twins came. So my whole world turned upside down at that stage. And as time went by, the kids started to grow up. I couldn't work much. I did a little bit of admin work from home to keep things going.
Mm.
My art was gone completely. It wasn't even safe to have oil paints around the kids. So my creativity was running dry. And I went back, I was miserable, basically. And I went back to the same fortune teller, and I was telling her about all my woes. And in the middle of a conversation, she just literally stopped and shrieked almost, right, right, right. And she started to hammer with her finger at the piece of paper that I was I'd taken notes down. And and I wrote down right, right, right. And I thought she meant go home now and write about all your woes, and your
Yeah.
problems will solve themselves. That's exactly what I did. Went home, opened my laptop, new page, blah, 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 writing. This is fierce boring. So I opened a new page and I started to write a children's story. And I'd say a paragraph in, maybe a page in, and I went running into my husband. I said, oh my God, it was literally a eureka moment for me. This is what I should have been doing with my life. Why didn't it occur to me? It genuinely didn't occur to me that this was my passion and this is what I should have been doing. Now, I was clueless. I thought I could just finish the book and get it published. And
Yep.
thank God, maybe I didn't know to some extent, because, that hope was there that,
Yeah.
I was actually going to publish a book. And I spent, from that moment on, I spent every waking minute writing and illustrating. Obviously, I did the illustration as well,
Mm.
of this chapter book. And I thought, this is what I should be doing. And it was only then that I kind of thought back to all of I was literally searching my own mind. Why did I not write earlier? And then I realized, hold on a second, writing was always there. Like from the age of about 7 or 8, I was keeping journals every night. They started off with your little kind of half page, per
Mm.
day or whatever it might be, and they ended up being these. I have one here actually. To your viewers on YouTube, this one, I think I was 7 when I did this one, and it
Wow.
started off this tiny little thing of so much room for per day,
Yeah.
and it's bulging now. It has everything from my fingernails that fell off, to crisp bags that I sizzled in the fire until they shrunk, to coins I found on the ground. And it has my horoscope for every day, the top 10 songs for every day. It's literally a history in a little book. And
Yeah.
I realized that I was doing that right into my teenage years, just literally writing, writing, writing. There's stories in themselves in those books. And then I started thinking more about my jobs that I used to do. Although I might have been in HR or office management, I was the go-to person to write that difficult email or letter or whatever it was
Okay.
at the time.
You were the person
Or
with the way with words.
I wrote the presentations for the boss, and I was always the one doing the writing. But again, never occurred to me that maybe I should make a go at it. And when I really thought hard about it, when I was in 5th year in school, I remember English class, which was never really my favorite subject up until this particular teacher I had. And she used to make us write a lot of stories, essays, stories. Um, and it was our first bit of creative writing, actually, when we got into writing a little bit of fiction, short stories. And I remember, for inspiration, my parents used to get, do you remember the Reader's Digest? It's probably well before your
Yes.
time. Tiny little book that used to come in the post. And I remember reading that, and it would have all sorts of these little one-liners, literally
Mm.
written down the bottom of the page, or metaphors, or whatever it might be. And I used to think these were brilliant. So I try and feed them into my stories, and end the story on one of these fantastic one-liners. I know it's half inch, but it was still, to me, it was very clever that I managed to kind of evolve my story around this little one-liner. And I gained a huge interest in writing, but unfortunately, I had a run-in with that teacher. So I felt there was something growing at that time in me when it came to English and creative writing. But she accused me of not getting my homework in on time one day. Imagine something so simple. And I was humiliated because I had done this. She'd obviously mixed me up with somebody else. She must have been having a bad day.
It was
And
just
it
enough to
really,
throw you
it
off, though.
really threw me off. it completely threw me off when I focused back on my art then. So I always wonder, was that like a sliding door moment? Like, had she praised me for my work on that, literally in the corridor that day, would I have continued to write a bit more? I don't know. But at the end of the day, what's meant for you won't pass you by. So when I met the fortune teller all those years later, I suddenly realized I have been writing all my life, but and I have little poems stuck up, framed on the wall that I wrote for my mother on her 60th birthday or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
So they're everywhere. So I kind of knew that it was always in me to do it. And what a moment to find out, like, this is what I should be doing. We all wonder what we should do when we grow up. It just took me a long time.
And I have to say, when I was listening to a different podcast in the research for this interview that you were on, and you told that story about the fortune teller saying, "Right, right, right," and there's lots of different ways to tell fortunes. And I won't lie, I had a giggle to myself because I thought, imagine if that fortune teller was saying, like, you had your palm out, but it was your left palm. She was like, "No, you're right, right, right," as in your right hand. And that accidentally sent you on a path.
It just shows you something so simple can do it. But yeah, no, she was using the little tarot cards, and apparently they told her.
There you go. Well, that's good.
Yeah, I must go back to her actually.
You
See
should,
what's
yeah.
next.
Bring a copy of Elsetime, which I would now like to move on to and talk a little bit about. So first, could you just, maybe before we talk about you and writing the book and everything, could you just tell our viewers and listeners what the book is about?
Sure. Well, it's a children's book first off, for
Yeah.
9 to 12-year-olds, which is known as middle grade. Um, So yeah, it's a time travel story, and it's set in both 1864 and 1928. Um, and 1928 was actually the year where the Great Flood of London actually happened in real life. So that was kind of the inspiration behind the story. So yeah, back in 1864, we meet Needle Luckett, who is a young 12-year-old mudlark. So he, scratches around in the muddy foreshore looking for treasures that he can kind of do up and then sell on his mother's market stall. And he has a special gift, and that is when he holds something in the palm of his hand, he can actually tell its history. So he can, and he feels it inside as if it's actually happening. So, whenever he does hold something, the colder it is, the older it is. But one day he picks up treasure and discovers that it's hot. So obviously that's very peculiar. And then he realizes it's treasure from the future. And this treasure, when he does eventually get to listen to it, he discovers it's warning him of a great flood where people are going to die 64 years into the future in 1928. So following his crow called Magpie, they don't travel elsewhere. They stay in the same spot, but they travel to Elsetime, 1928, where they meet with this unbearably impatient girl called Glory. She's a jeweler's apprentice, and together they have to warn everybody of this great flood. So that's the guts of it. The adventure starts there.
That's it's such a great idea, and it's just, there's something very ethereal about the concept of else time, because elsewhere, somewhere, all those kind of things, that, like, somewhere, sometime, they make sense. But I just love the phrase else time, because it's
But
just,
that word should be there.
it should. Yeah, no, you're
You know
dead.
what? When
That's what
when
I'm
it
saying.
came to me, I remember Googling it because I thought, is that just a word I haven't heard of? Like, me get my dictionary back out and see if it's in my dictionary. But and it wasn't. And I was baffled because else time. If you've got your elsewheres or what have you, why haven't you got your else time?
Yeah,
And that's actually, forms a scene in the book where Needle, who struggles sometimes with his words and his communication, is flustered and is trying to explain to Glory that he is from the same town as her, but so he's not from elsewhere. He's from a different time or else time. So
right.
that's where the word comes
Yeah,
in the story.
it's such a great idea. Can I ask, was Elstime the story you started writing that day after you met the fortune teller, or was Elstime something that came later?
It came later. The first story I wrote was called something like Bobby and Faye's Marvelous Imaginings, and it was a chapter book, an illustrated chapter book, and I suppose that was just my intro into the world of writing. Soon after that, I wrote another book, a middle grade novel, and I poured my heart and soul into this book. And that's where I really learned the craft of
Yeah.
writing, and also about the actual world of writing, and how publishing worked. So I that's where I really figured out, that's where I did my study basically. Yeah, and then the next book was Elsetime. So yeah, there was a few years, I think 2 years, maybe between the first time I started to dedicate myself to my writing, and when I started to write Elsetime. So I suppose in one sense, it's my third book that I've ever tried to write. So I'm lucky. Sometimes it takes a hell of a lot more, as we know. It takes a lot longer to get a book published. But yeah, no, it definitely wasn't my first book. No, I wasn't that lucky.
So then how long was it from the fortune teller saying write to publication day of Elsetime? How long was that? And what was
5 years, I'd say. Yeah,
I
I
mean,
think
that
it was.
was
It was
fast.
2015. I think when I met her. And then 2017, I had my first draft of Elsetime. And I think it was 2018, I secured my agent. So yeah, it took. I suppose it was fast. It's a long time though to have. It's particular to have Elsetime in my head. From
Yeah.
2017 to 2020, it's a long time, really. In terms of headspace.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, and it all happens then so quickly. Once the buttons are pressed and everybody said yes, it all snowballs.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a long journey.
It is. It definitely is. And for most of the people, most of the writers that watch and listen to the podcast are self-published or indie
Mm.
published. What do you think is for anyone who's looking to be traditionally published? What do you think was the most difficult part of that whole process of when you finish draft one of Elsetime to you have a physical copy in your hand? What was the hardest part of that time?
Well, I suppose getting an agent is the hardest. And like I do know quite a few self-published writers. And in fact, I intended to self-publish myself um, in the very early days. And it was actually a serendipitous meeting I had with Vanessa Fox O'Loughlin of writing.ie. I was still working, I think, part-time at the time. Um, it was, the kids were at home and all this stuff. And I'd been asked to go to a conference about creating websites. And I thought, okay, I needed to do it for work, but it would be very handy if I wanted to self-publish my book
Mm.
that I'd been writing, my first book. So at that meeting, I think there were 3 publishing people at it because we all had to introduce ourselves as you go around the room. And I thought, whoa, this is a bit of a coincidence
Mm.
that I should turn up at one of these business things and 3 people were involved in publishing. But I mentioned when I was introducing myself that I was there with 2 hats on, one as a writer and one as in my work capacity. And so luckily Vanessa came up to me on the break and said, look, we're running a competition called Date with an Agent.
Okay.
And this was the first time a thing went off my head going, oh, maybe I need an agent. Um, and she said, why don't you apply and see how you go? And I said, oh, sure, I will. Why not?
Yeah.
So I did. I sent in that book, the first 1,000 words, whatever the hell it was, can't remember at the time. And I also thought, okay, this is my chance to actually get an agent. And so what I did was I literally overnight wrote the first chapter of my next book, which was called Ambiguity. And I sent the 2 in and very was over the moon to find out a few weeks later that the second book that I'd written specifically for that competition had won a date with an agent. Now the book, I'd only written a chapter or 2. So I was suddenly like,
Oh
oh my
no.
God, I need to get writing. So yeah, it was what a learning curve. My God. But I have to say, anybody who is interested in getting traditionally published, it is the best place to start because you go in there with very little knowledge of how the publishing world works and you come out with everything you need to know. Because the way in which that competition is run is, yes, you get your date with your agent, and you get, gold dust advice from an agent. But the whole day is designed around teaching you how the industry works. So there's all sorts of different speakers at the actual conference that day. So I learned everything there. I also met people who are still good friends, good writing pals, from that one first day. So now, yeah, I didn't get an agent at it. And maybe I went in a little bit, foolishly thinking this was my only chance and I had to get it right. I got my nails done. You know, I even had the satchel, that looked like a writer. Oh my God. Anyway, so yeah, I made a complete
All
fool
the
of myself.
stereotypes.
Yeah, made a complete, what of myself in front of the agent. But she was so kind, Polly Nolan, is her name. She's quite well established in the UK. So, but not one to be kind of beaten down. I applied the next year again, with Elsetime. So, and that really set me on. She remembered me. How could she not, making such a fool of myself from the previous year? Polly was, gobsmacked at the difference in terms of growth,
Wow.
in terms of my writing in that one year. So, that really encouraged me to keep going. And I think I wasn't long writing Elsetime at the time. So, yeah. So that getting the agent was to me the hardest hurdle to get over.
Mm.
So how will I explain how that happened then? Beyond that point, I had obviously finished Elsetime, and
Yeah.
I realized that, from ambiguity's attempts at getting an agent, I realized how hard it was going to be, and to get into it, literally I could visualize the slush pile, that I was right down here down the bottom. I had nothing, no published works, no poetry, nothing to sort of say, look, I am a dedicated writer.
Mm.
So I started to enter competitions with Elsetime, and I entered one called the Wells Festival of Literature Book for Children Award, and um, lo and behold, I won it. And I was, the way you just don't know whether your book is brilliant or absolute rubbish.
Yeah.
So to win it really blew my mind. And but what it really did was it meant that I was going up a couple of notches on a slush pile.
Well, yeah.
And that to me was the real benefit, because you do have to grab the eye of the agent somehow. And I kept at it. Then I applied a few weeks later to the Bath Novel Award, for children, and I longlisted in that. So that was even more well known. So I got further up the pile. And lo and behold, it worked, because suddenly I was getting requests for a full manuscript from various different agents at that point.
Okay.
Um,
You
so that was key, having
competitions you were
something.
entering then, were you entering that with a sample of the manuscript of Elsetime or the full manuscript?
It was with the Wells one, if I remember correctly, it was the full manuscript. I don't think there was a shortlisting. It was just, or was there a shortlisting? There was a shortlisting. So it was, yeah, it was a sample, and then the full manuscript once it got shortlisted. The Bath Novel Award was the same. Um, as far as I remember. God, it seems like it's only in 2017. It feels like donkeys years ago. So yeah, you submit an amount, you get longlisted, you send in your full manuscript, and then they read that. The Bath Novel Award is slightly different. Now, there's obviously a lot of your listeners are probably aware of it, but there's also the adult writing as well, for in the Bath Novel Awards, and then there's the children's version. But in the children's one, luckily they have young readers, so they have a whole cohort of 9 to 12-year-olds reading these books. So
Yeah.
you get their feedback at the end, which is really, really useful, from the horse's mouth. It's fantastic. So yeah, but they both read the full manuscript, and but it made an enormous difference to me, to have that on my writing CV, if you like.
Yeah.
So that would be one bit of advice I'd have for anybody who is seeking to be traditionally published, is to find a way of standing out amongst the crowd. Your writing might do that and should do that on its own, but you sometimes need something else to really get your book under the nose of these agents.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like we all know how many submissions they get daily.
Oh yeah,
It's crazy
it's
world.
crazy. I wouldn't
Um,
want to be a publisher just for that, because I'd feel so bad
they
looking at
know.
this. Like, I mean, even my own pile of books that I want to read myself that are published, like I
Yeah,
can't get through them fast enough. So I can't imagine what it's like to have people sending stuff to me.
I'd
Um,
say it's very difficult, but yeah, I was lucky in that when I did get the requests for full manuscripts, most of them came back with a kind of a positive response, but no direct bites. They were all looking for me to revise and resubmit. So they all had sort of areas at which they felt I needed to improve in the book. And, you know, when I got the first one in, I immediately thought, oh, I need to do this. I need to make these changes quick. But then another one came in and another one came in and they clashed with each other. So, you know, I there was no way I could incorporate everybody's changes. So it suddenly made me realize I need to do even more research in terms of understanding what these agents are about, who they represent, who do I want to work with, for potentially the rest of my writing career. And it was only when I got one from Josephine Hayes of the Blair Partnership, and her suggestions were everyone. I was like, tick the box, tick the box. I just 100% agreed with everything she said. And at the end, I was expecting to read, you know, please revise and resubmit.
Mm.
But it didn't. It said, please come over and see us. And
Oh, wow.
I thought, okay, this is definitely something. And hilariously, um, when I'd started off my whole writing career, when I thought it was going to be easy, when I wrote that first little chapter book, I sent it to the Blair Partnership because they did J.K. Rowling, and I thought, okay, they're going to publish my book. So I sent it to them, and believe it or not, based on my first effort, they actually looked for a full manuscript.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So that was a huge. I cried when I got that email. I literally thought I meant to be doing this, but anyway, little did I know. But anyway, so it was wonderful that the last email that I really kind of took in terms of agents was also from them. And I went over that day over to London. I'll never forget it. It was the most magical day ever. And I had just a brilliant session with Jo Hayes in her offices. And I expected, you know, like you do at the end, that she would say, we'll come back to you, you know.
Yeah.
And she said at the end that, well, we'd love to represent you. And I just fell off the chair, just couldn't believe it, was in complete shock. Um, and I literally ran from that building beaming. And, you know, I'm sure a lot of your writers notice this, but when you're writing, so many little serendipitous moments happen that kind of push you along the way, like my fortune teller, like meeting Vanessa that day who told me to enter a competition. And that particular day when I got my agent, I ran from her offices and I went to this tiny little green in the middle of London. It's next to Oxford Street, like it's in the centre of the city. And I was sitting there waiting for my sister to come back and join me. She traveled with me, and I was sitting on the grass, and right beside me on the grass, kind of stuck into the mud, was a gold ring with a ruby stone in it. And the reason why, obviously, that's a big deal to find something like that in the grass. But what really blew my mind was in the first couple of pages of Elsetime, Needle, our mudlark, finds a gold ring that did have a ruby stone in it once.
Oh,
And he describes it as twisting around twice, the gold twists around twice. That was in the book already that I'd written. And this ring, I find, I kid you not,
no way.
twisted around twice, sort of, with the ruby stone. So I just couldn't, I was just, this was meant to be, you know. So, and I'm sure, I don't know, maybe I'm just batty, but I certainly have noticed as I write that there are little things that happen around you, or maybe your eyes are more focused on it.
Yeah,
You know, the whole
definitely.
time. So
I know
I
what you
think you have to take the magic when it comes, you know.
Yeah. That's a lovely way to say it. You have to take the magic when it comes. I like that. I want to now talk about two things, but kind of together, if that makes sense. You launched a book in September 2020, the year that we're all glad to see the back of. So I'd like to ask you a bit like what that was like, but also incorporate a little bit of how we got to know each other before I interviewed you. So anyone who has been a fan of the show or watching the show, you might remember last season I interviewed Sarah Webb, another children's author from Ireland. And Sarah, after our interview, reached out to me and asked would I be interested in volunteering for Wonderfest. And Eve, that's how I met Eve, because Eve and Sarah organized it together. So could you tell us a little bit about launching a book in 2020 and how Wonderfest kind of came about also?
Yeah, well, okay, 2020, what a year to publish a book, Mother of God, certainly to be a debut writer in that year. So yeah, the book was meant to be published in June, and we had kind of geared up towards that. We'd started the cogs, you know, in terms of PR back in February, I think. And things were beginning to really hot up. We were getting ready, lists of who to send it out to for early reviews and so forth. And then the plug was pulled completely. And there was no arguing with it. It had to be done. And the publisher decided September would be a good time, which I actually was delighted about, because the book is set in sort of a wintry time. And, I felt the middle of summer was a bit odd anyway in the first place. So I thought this is all meant to be. And I genuinely thought September was going to be grand. And
Sure, we all did.
yeah. And of course that wasn't going to be the case. So it was unnerving to try and publish a book in that time, because I had pictured myself touring bookshops around, not just in Ireland but in the UK, getting to know people at festivals. I had great plans, and one big thing that I was so geared up and so excited about was meeting the readers and doing school events. Obviously my book is very much about finding treasure and what you can do with them. So I literally have a treasure box full of mudlark treasures that I couldn't wait for the kids to dip in and tell stories with. I had all these great plans, and they were there from day one, when I started writing that book. And that, of course, didn't happen. And so, you could be upset about it, but the flip side, I've never launched a book before. So, it was going to be special, whatever happened. So I made the most of it. There were things I had to change. For example, I couldn't go to bookshops like I had planned. So instead of going to do signings, I, designed up some book plates that I signed and sent out to bookshops. If I got wind that any bookshop was stocking my book, I'd write to them, say thank you. So you kind of have to really find other ways of connecting with booksellers, the most important people in your career. So, that was one thing I very quickly learned. But as part of that, obviously, we all have our tribe, our writing tribe. We need that. It's essential as we go through this journey. And through that, I joined CBI, Children's Books Ireland. And this is where Wonderfest was born, if you like. CBI organised coffee mornings, Zoom coffee mornings, to get us writers together, really to boost our morale, I suppose, and compare notes. And we were on one of those coffee mornings, and it was a constant kind of barrage of, oh my God, this is so difficult. How are we going to get into kids' schools to do our jobs? And that's how most children's writers, certainly in this country, make a living, is doing school events. So it was a big problem. And one person butted in and said, well, let's solve the problem. And it was as simple as that. And that was Sarah Webb. And she said, okay, let's put together a festival. And it was like a decision she made at the drop of a hat. She said, please show me your hand if you're interested in helping. And 12 of us did that. And and we didn't have a clue, where it would lead. But my God, that woman, she's got superpowers. The way I can put it. She has all the right connections too, and she knows her stuff. She's organized multiple festivals. So she organized what we called Wonderfest, and I wasn't sure where or how I could help as a debut writer in this whole process. So the only thing I could offer was my admin skills, and I said I can do spreadsheets. That's all I can do is spreadsheets. I love Excel. It's a really sad story.
Throw in there, I have seen Eve's spreadsheet skills. Oh my God, it's impressive.
You've seen nothing yet, Conor. Goodness gracious me. But all those jobs that I had, I spent my life in Excel. Like, I absolutely adored it. God almighty. Anyway, so this was just, no problem. I'll keep the data, if you like. And but that turned out to be a hell of a lot more work than I had banked on. So if you can imagine, my book launched in September. And my intention was, and I knew I was going to be crazy busy throughout the months of August, September, October, when there's a lot of PR stuff lined up in terms of interviews and articles that you write and so forth. So taking this on in the middle of that was a bit bananas, to be brutally honest. But I genuinely thought it would only take a couple of hours a week. How wrong I was. So it turned out that this became, working on this became full time. My kids were abandoned. The pets were abandoned. I literally gave it my heart and soul, and it took a lot more work than I had originally banked. But my God, did I love it! I really, I actually wondered, is this why I'm on this planet? Never mind the writing. Is it to organize festivals? Because I felt it was bringing together all of my skills,
Yeah.
in terms of my organizational skills, admin, the book world, everything, creativity, the lot. So I really thought, Jesus, this is it. But yeah, I mean, there was a nail biting moments, several of them, to make sure that this thing rolled out right. But it came together absolutely beautifully. But it was Sarah Webb at the helm, and me just being the yes, ma'am, no, ma'am, behind it.
Big lights
So
full. Yeah, it was brilliant, and from a very tiny part that I played in it, it was so amazing to see. So for anyone who isn't aware, basically it was just a whole load of, it was a full 3 days,
yeah,
Friday, Saturday, Sunday.
Friday, Saturday, Sunday. I think there
Uh,
were 60 artists, just under 60 artists involved, and there were 30 events, all digital. This was never done before. Complete digital rollout, and it was aimed at schools and families as well. So there were a huge mix of events, from workshops to panels to, it was just brilliant. It covered everything, even for parents, you know. So the parents could also join in and see what books were out there, and recommended for their children, which is brilliant coming up to Christmas.
yeah,
So it was a fantastic weekend in November, and a massive, massive success. I'm so proud to have been involved. I really am. Um,
yeah. It was just so good, and I think one thing you touched on it there, and it's really important to recognize that it was the first event of its kind, really, to have this purely digital book festival, and I think that's something that other countries and other organizations are going to be looking at, and looking at the example that yourself and Sarah and so many other people all kind of blazed that trail, didn't you? So
yeah, we
that's
literally did blaze that trail, and we learned so much along the way. Really, but the main thing is that Sarah had a dream, and she had 100% faith that it would work. And now I'm a pessimist to the best of times. She's Pollyanna, and I suppose that's why it worked so well, as a team, obviously with everybody else involved. It wasn't just the two of us, but
yeah.
it's certainly, like, I would bring my worries and concerns to the party, and she would just be, it's gonna work. This is how we're gonna do it, and it's gonna work. And I put all my faith in her. My God, she turned up trumps. She really did make it work. So yeah, there was a lot to learn. But it worked out extremely well in the end. And it's not the end of Wonderfest. It's growing legs, and we'll see more of it. I'm sure in 2021, be it digital or not. So it was great to be there from the get-go, and
Yeah.
to meet so many fantastic writers and illustrators in Ireland. That was the main benefit for me, was to be literally hugged by the community. And that really, in this year, was
Of all years.
crucial for me, because otherwise it would have been a very lonely experience launching a book in this year. But to have everybody's 100% support was just incredible. And to learn from these masters, it was just great to see them in action, and the creativity, nothing was a problem. Let's do this, let's do this, oh my gosh, if we'd had more time, we would have landed men on the moon. Like, it was just incredible, you know.
My next question was going to be, would you do it again? But I think the answer is yes. Is it?
It is, with a caveat, and that is this.
Oh,
I suppose I know how much time it took. It literally took over my life for a period of, I don't know, 6 weeks. Now, my intention during those 6 weeks was to write book number two. And that didn't happen. My head would have exploded now, to try and do the two. So I've learned that myself, that, it's not like a normal 9 to 5 job doing a festival. It's every hour. It's 7 days a week, until D-Day. And I knowing that, I would make sure, if I am doing it again, that I have that time cleared to do that, because you don't need this nagging guilt that you should
yeah.
be writing when you're doing something else. So that was a tough one to overcome, but now that it's done, I'm back in my writing. And that's important too. So yeah, I really do hope I get the opportunity to do it again, but I will be prepared this time.
So speaking of getting back into your writing, what are you working on now, or is it something you don't want to share yet?
Oh, sure, I'd share anything. No, I'm writing another middle grade. My heart is in middle grade, absolutely 100%. It's what I read all the time. With the odd little adult book sort of thrown in. But yeah, I'm writing a book which is set in Paris in the 1800s.
Cool.
And it follows the story of a little girl called Wren, who's a chestnut roaster. And Wren has a gift, I suppose, or a burden, whichever way you want to look at it, in that she has the inability to forget. So she can remember everything in her entire life.
Wow.
So she can't forget, even if she wanted to. And something crazy happens that makes her realize that things are not all as they seem in her Paris. So that's the story I'm writing at the moment. I'm actually blessed in that I won some mentorship with Words Ireland, which I'm sure a lot of your readers are aware of. It's a fantastic initiative that's run every year, and writers can apply. Published or not published, you can apply to have mentorship over the course of a year with a published writer in Ireland. So I'm working with Elizabeth Murray on that. And I'm delighted to have her because, with the year that's been in it, I've needed, my God, I've never needed mentorship more. And I need her to kind of keep pushing me to keep going. I'm sure we've all found it hard this year to keep focus.
On all spectrums of creativity, it has been like the most strange year in the sense of, for a lot of people, they found more time to create. I mean, this podcast that I have now came from 2020. Like I probably wouldn't have dedicated the time to learn how to do it without the 2020 having happened. And I know of other shows as well, like that are the same, but then at the same time, for other people, it's gone the complete opposite, and it's been so debilitating. And there's certain creative careers that people would have had to leave because the income wasn't there and they weren't able to support themselves. So it's this weird, like on one end of the spectrum, it's been great, and on the other end, it's been terrible. It's just,
Yeah, I've certainly found it a very, very big upheaval. In terms of, obviously, the first half of the year was homeschooling, which brain drained me. My God, you teachers, don't know how you do it. Whoa, but that was that obviously had a massive impact on my writing time.
yeah.
And then between that and then launching a book, and then
What
another lockdown, then festival and so forth, it's been really difficult to find the headspace to actually create and to write. And I think it was Derek Landy, I think, said in Wonderfest that to be a good writer, you have to be able to daydream, and meaning you need to lose yourself in your story. And obviously you can't daydream when hell's going on around you. So yeah, I think that kind of summed it up for me, that don't be pushing yourself to do something that's not quite possible in a year, like it has. But I'm hopeful that 2021, for people in finding themselves in that boat, they'll have a little bit more push and focus this year, that regardless of what's going on around us, that we can really try to etch out some clean writing time or creativity, whatever it is we do, to be able to focus on that again, because I think we're all learning that we have to carry on, and we have to adapt, and whatever comes of it, great. Isn't it wonderful that, in like the likes of yourself, you were able to create something so brilliant as a podcast out of it? And hopefully you will continue that when life starts to get back to normal, so
that's what the challenge is here with
that's the challenge for you. Yeah. So it's been a real shake up, I think, for all of us,
it
in
really
this
has. And
industry.
I think the one common benefit that everyone has from 2020 is everyone had to reevaluate what was important and what wasn't for themselves. I mean, you had that experience in your past when you left your graphic design job, and when you left your IT HR job. So I think that's one thing. Everyone had that experience in the last 12
Yeah.
months of having to reevaluate what was important and what
You
wasn't.
do, and you're making me think of Roald Dahl saying, I actually have it stuck to my computer. I work with this thing 24/7. And he once said that if you are interested in something, no matter what it is, go at it full speed, embrace it with both arms, hug it, love it, and above all, become passionate about it because lukewarm is no good. And I have that stuck on my laptop 24/7, an old scrappy piece of post-it. Um, and to me, that sums it up because, you have to find the time to find your passion and really go for it. And if you don't, life's too short. Like,
Oh
you really have one chance at this. So just, if you are a writer and, you're in the middle of your journey, or it's, you haven't quite published yet, be it self-published or traditionally, keep going. If it's your passion, do it. Don't go half-hearted. Go at it.
go hard and go home.
No matter what. Yeah.
Eve, this has been great. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to start wrapping up now. I have a set of questions I ask everyone at the end because I think it's just nice to hear the same questions, but I have all the different answers that it ends up being. So when this interview is over and after we've said our goodbyes and good lucks and all that after the recording, what's the first thing you're going to do?
Eat. Yeah. My kids are probably it's now what? It's 1:20 in the afternoon.
Yeah.
The kids are at home and they need feeding. So yeah, food, lunch, definitely.
What are your goals as a writer now? Like what's I know you're currently writing that book set in Paris, but like what are your kind of big, huge someday goals as a writer?
Gosh, my someday goals. Well, just ambition's a dangerous thing, really.
Isn't
But
it?
I really do. I do want to be published again. I want to hopefully be published. I keep thinking I want to be published by a large publishing house. I was published by a small indie publisher in the UK. And what it brings, I mean, you can be a big fish in a small sea or a small fish in a big sea, but I'd like to experience both. I would one day like to have a traditional book launch where it's not 2020 and experience, literally that wonderful moment where you're with your family and your friends
You will.
celebrating with champagne. I want to do that. That's my ambition. So I want to kind of redo it again.
Good. Do you have any goals that have nothing to do with writing at all that you'd like to share?
Yeah, stay healthy is really my goal. Stay healthy. And I really am focused on writing now. And this is just day one of my career, I hope. Um, so I want to focus on that. I really do. And yeah, I could get sidetracked with ambitions about painting and whatever other creative, thing that I want to do. But no, I want to focus on my writing now, at least for another while, and see where it brings me.
Good. So then finally, a second last question. Where, if anyone who's watching or listening, where can they find you online?
I'm on everywhere really. I have my website, evemcdonnell.com. You can contact me through that, obviously, through the contact page. But I'm also up on Twitter. I love Twitter. It's where I found my writing tribe. So I'm there as Eve_Mac_Donnell. And I'm on Instagram as Eve McDonnell as well. So yeah, you can find me there.
And there'll be links to that, as always, in the description on YouTube and in the show notes. And then my very last question, Eve, is what is the last book you read?
I actually read two books together.
Oh,
One was a YA, because I'm always reading either middle grade or a little bit of YA. But this particular YA I fell in love with. It's called The Wolf Road, and it's by Richard Lambert, and it's my publisher published this book as well. So, but my God, it blew me away. Fantastic book. At the same time, I was reading an adult book, which is Sarah Baum, another Baum, Sarah's book called Handiwork came out, I think, was it earlier this year? It's a fabulous book. And for anybody who creates, it is a book you should read because it'll speak to you. It literally follows her day-to-day life, as she's a visual artist and a writer, so it actually literally follows her process and what it means to her. And it really, every other page I was going, yeah, I could fully understand where she was coming from. So that's a brilliant book, and it's a very quick read. It's a fabulous book. So I would recommend that to any of your listeners who are creative.
Brilliant. Eve, thank you so much for carving out the time to do this. It has been great to get to know you and great to hear your entire story. And thank you so much for coming on to the show.
Well, thank you for having me, Conor. It's been an absolute joy. You've got me back into January and a good start now, the old brain flowing again.
Good. Thanks.